Hello, everyone. Welcome to this webinar on life after college, in particular, what employers think of graduates from US colleges. I'm very pleased to be joined by representatives from two companies here, one from Mott MacDonald, which is a large engineering company, and one from Quinn Emanuel, which is a law firm. We were supposed to be joined by a third speaker. Unfortunately, that person has had to pull out at the very last minute, but I'm glad that we have two eminent speakers here. So in no particular order, I'd like to first of all invite Renee Chandonnet to talk about herself and Mott MacDonald. Renee.
Oh, thanks so much, Jason. I'm so pleased to be here. My name is Renee Chandonnet, and as Jason said, I work for Mott MacDonald. Mott MacDonald is a large international firm. We do a lot of advisory work around the world. As you might tell from my accent, I am based in the US with Mott MacDonald, and Mott MacDonald does a whole lot of recruiting for our offices throughout the world and in many different areas. I happen to work in international development for Mott MacDonald, and I manage and am a project principal for work that we conduct out of the US for USAID, which is a large government donor. I work with the Millennium Challenge Corporation, which is another large US donor. We do projects for UNICEF, the World Bank, et cetera. But I'm very glad to be here and looking forward to the Q&A later.
Thank you very, very much, Renee. And James, would you like to introduce yourself and Quinn Emanuel?
Yes, my name is James Brennan. I'm a solicitor advocate, and I'm the chairman of the construction engineering disputes practice for Quinn Emanuel. Quinn Emanuel is a law firm which is global, although began in Los Angeles in 1986, and we are, I think, probably the world's largest dispute resolution firm. That's all we do. We just do disputes. I also potentially can also contribute in other respect to this. Whilst I'm based in London, I oversee our Middle Eastern offices as well, and I'm responsible for them. But prior to joining Quinn Emanuel about 5 years, actually coming up to 6 years ago, I was a senior equity partner at Herbert Smith and then Herbert Smith Freehills. So I've sat on recruitment committees in both the US firms and the top English firms. So perhaps for that perspective, I'm hoping that might be useful.
Great, thank you very much, James. So I'm going to get started by sharing my screen and sharing a presentation just to talk a little bit about US admissions in general, and hopefully everyone can see that. I'm going to look at my colleague to check. You're able to see that presentation? Yes, good, thumbs up. So thank you very much for everyone attending. Like I said, there is an opportunity to ask questions. Feel free to pop any questions you've got in the Q&A box. We may answer them in a moment, or if they're particularly pertinent, I'll answer them straight away. First thing, just a little bit about UES. I'm sure that most of you listening are aware. We have been going scarily for 9 years. We work with about 800 students a year from the UK, almost all of whom are applying to the US. We actually help with all the aspects of the application process. That is the SAT and ACT, which is a very boring bit of the process, but we also help with what we would call college counseling, which is helping to choose the right colleges in the States and elsewhere. We also help with European and other universities, and all the little bits that are involved in that application process. And we work with a very large number of schools within the UK, supporting their teachers and supporting students within the schools. So a little bit about why students choose the US. Now, most of you may know all these things, and that is why you are listening, because you're planning on going to the US. But there are probably a few things here that you might not have thought of. But first one, very obvious one, is that there are an awful lot of colleges to choose from in the United States. There are actually about 1,500 four-year undergraduate ranked colleges, so places that you can get undergraduate degrees from. But the really big one, and the thing that's actually particularly relevant to today, is the breadth of programs. I'm going to be talking a little bit about the idea of liberal arts in America, the idea of studying a broad range of things before you specialize, And that's a big driver of students going to the US in particular, because they have the ability to study lots of things before they decide what their major is, and maybe try something completely different while they're there. But if they've got an idea of a major in mind, they can study that. Funding options. American universities are very expensive on paper, but there are lots of ways of reducing that cost, and that is a big reason for people applying. Sense of adventure. It is fun to study abroad, and campus life, as I'm sure Renee will agree, is very important and very fun in America. Sports opportunities. If you happen to be a sports person, you can certainly play sports in America, and you definitely will be watching it if you go to an American college. And the nice thing for people in the UK is that you get a decision, not an offer. When you're applying for undergraduate, that means that it's not dependent on your final A-level results, although there is a small caveat with that, which is that if you completely flunk your exams, your decision could be removed, could be taken back. So how good are US colleges? Well, this is a very typical question that comes from parents in particular when students are thinking about going abroad. They want to know if the university is good. Now, the word good is completely laden with lots of subjectivity there. And I think what people are asking is, are they good value for money? Is it worth, and are they good value for time in terms of the time put into applying, the time taken to travel there, and the cost of attending them? But just to kind of allay some fears straight away, if you're going to go off rankings, and I always encourage people to think a bit more widely, in the Times Higher Education rankings, this is actually very similar for the last ones as well. 42 US colleges are in the world's top 100 universities. Now, it's probably very difficult to think of 42 US colleges if you're not an American. But that does mean that there's probably loads of colleges that you've never heard of, which are extremely good objectively. There's also a lot of funding in American universities, very large endowments, and also very large research funding, much more than people might imagine. But how do colleges in America choose students? This is very important as well for what we're talking about, because it is not just on your academic profile. Academic profile is important, so test score, GCSEs, A-levels or IB predictions, of course they're important, but then it's other things. US universities will be assessing holistically what the student is like overall, and that includes personality traits, their characteristics like intellectual curiosity, resilience, self-awareness. Extracurriculars, you have to write and describe them, passion and commitment to them, community spirit and contribution like volunteering, but also things like leadership potential, opportunities for responsibility and organization are very important. The ability to write well and reflectively be able to describe yourself and your story, and showing interest in the institution. These are just some of the things that are important to American universities when they're assessing students. But what you can see is that it's not just about the academics. And this leads on to an important consequence, which is that they clearly care about more than just the ability to do well in an exam. And that idea, that philosophy carries all the way through American colleges. Now, we already mentioned this idea of liberal arts, and I just want to take a moment to explain what it means very simply. First of all, it really means studying a broad range of things before specializing. So there are certain colleges in America that are known as liberal arts colleges, which tend to be undergraduate only, and really focus on very high quality teaching. But even if you don't go to a liberal arts college, you will probably, with a few exceptions, be studying liberal arts, even if you don't know it. And that is because you will be studying a broad range of subjects and not declaring your major until the end of your second year. This is very much part of the philosophy of American education. And it includes those typical academic subjects, but also it's a very big focus on things like critical thinking, problem-solving skills, and transferable skills. And the speakers today will talk about how important those things are when it comes to being a decent graduate. And this is really one of the take-home messages that I want to give people, which is that you shouldn't think about university as being the place where you're going to become a specialist in a subject. It might be, but that's probably not going to happen until graduate study. Hopefully what you will learn at university are skills that you will be able to take on in the future to anything that you do. And that is what's important to employers. Just a few statistics that might try to explain a few things. Now, I was promised there would be an entry by a special guest there. I'll ask Renee in a moment what the cat's name was. But let's talk a little bit about employment rates, because this, I think, again, is tied up in this idea of what is a good value university. Employment rates at American universities, if we look through the very best ones, so this is the percentage of students who are in further study or in employment 6 months post-graduating. The very top university in America is Marquette University in Wisconsin. 96% of students. That is extremely high, and much higher than some of the big name universities that you might be thinking about. Providence College in Rhode Island, similarly very high. And third is Penn State in Pennsylvania. 3 fantastic colleges and universities, probably not automatically the ones that people apply to, although I have had students attending all 3 of those. But one of those statistics that's very important to consider is graduation rate. But right down, much further down that list is a big name university, Harvard. Harvard's graduation or employment rate rather is nice and high, but it is some way below some of those other colleges there. So don't automatically think that big name university is going to guarantee you a job. But let's talk about starting salaries. Another obvious way of understanding value for money. Median starting salaries post-graduation, number 1, and it has been number 1 in the US for a very long time, is Harvey Mudd in California. Very good university, extremely good for things like engineering and computer science. Average starting salary, $98,000. So you'd be surprised it's not maybe Stanford or Harvard, as people probably think. I'm just picking some at random here. Within all these numbers are some of those big names, of course, but what I want to explain is that in the very top paying universities, if you like, in America, there are plenty of places that you probably haven't heard of. Webb Institute in New York. There should be a K after these numbers, by the way. That's not $98 a year, wouldn't be very good value for money, but $98,000 a year, $85,000 per year at Webb Institute. Rose-Hulman, fantastic engineering college in Indiana, $81,000 down at number 12. Remember what I said, there were 1,500 colleges and universities to choose from, and I'm just looking in the very top echelons of those universities. And there's Babson, fantastic college in Boston for entrepreneurship and business, $78,000 a year, and Claremont McKenna, great liberal arts college in California, $76,000 a year. These are all within the top 25. So again, it is not just going to be the big famous names that are going to guarantee you large amounts of money. But that's enough from me. What I really want to do now is get our speakers talking, and in particular talking about the sorts of things that they are interested in. So I'm going to ask some questions in no particular order here, but Renee, perhaps we can start with you. Would you like to explain what qualities you and Mott MacDonald look for when graduates are applying to you?
Yeah, thank you. We absolutely look for a lot of the skills that you outlined in these slides previously. We definitely need graduates who are independent workers, who can think independently, have resilience. Oftentimes we're confronted with issues in the workplace to do with the projects that we're working on. We're looking for folks who are really solution oriented and have that sort of stamina to continue to work out a problem until it's solved. Those are all really important things. There's softer skills that we definitely look for in candidates. We want them to be friendly and good communicators. We want them to be able to write in a very clear way. And all of these opportunities are really afforded by participating in a liberal arts education, because even if you are an engineering student who in the US is working toward a degree in that professional specialization, you're also required to take courses in art, in history. And not only are you learning about those different things, but you're learning to write about those different things. So I think that's a great opportunity that I know is afforded by American universities.
Great, thank you for that. And James, same question to you. When I know things may be a bit different in law, because you do need people presumably to understand law to some extent to work in law. But what do you look for in an applicant?
Well, I'll be as brief as I can. Obviously, law is a vocational discipline, so you need to be a lawyer, and that means a variety of different things. In the United States, it's somewhat different in the sense that you do an undergraduate degree, and you can do an undergraduate degree pretty much anywhere you like, as long as it's a decent institution, and then your law degree is a postgraduate qualification in the US. Now, unfortunately, firms like ours, which are sort of, I think, the top, either number one or number two in the world in terms of profitability and desirability to join, it tends to be very, very competitive to get in. And so at that postgraduate level, there is a very high, unfortunately, and it has been for some time, a narrowing of the number of schools with where they come from, and they do come from the ones that you're talking about, so your Harvard type institutions. But at the undergraduate level, there's a wide variety of different courses that you can do. In the US, you're recruited from law school, so it's slightly different. In the UK, we tend to have a different view. You can do an undergraduate degree, and that undergraduate degree can be in anything that you like. And we would recruit you throughout that undergraduate degree. Now that may be in law. I did my degree in law. You don't need to do it in law. You could do it in anything. And then the law firm will sponsor you to do a short course, a 2-year course, or 2 courses. One is called the LPC, the Legal Practice Course, and the other might be the Graduate Diploma of Law, and that's another year. And that's called a conversion course. And many people do that. And so if we're looking at people who we recruit, certainly not at Queen Emmanuel in London, because we don't have a trainee program, but certainly Herbert Smith, we would look at undergraduates who would do history. My best trainee ever did a degree at UCL in chemistry, and and then she decided she wanted to be a lawyer. She turned out to be a fantastic lawyer who's actually now a partner at White & Case. So we look at that. Now, is that very competitive? Yes. I sat on the recruitment committee at Herbert Smith for many years. We would have about 800 to 1,000 applications for a single position. And that's in the UK. So there was, again, unfortunately, a narrowing of the, your Oxbridge sorts of places, although Russell Group would be fine as well, to choose from, and that is regrettable. There is no, however, and the point I make here is there's no precedent to say you couldn't come into that program and be recruited in the same way from a US institution. The things I'd say about that is, one, it would be unusual in the sense of the HR people that do this may not know quite where to fit you, certainly for a London application. But if it was somewhere really interesting and somewhere really special and you had a good story to tell, I'm almost certain that you would probably get through that first round as long as you did well in the degree. And I don't think that the fact that it would be not a classic, Russell Group or Oxbridge education wouldn't necessarily hold you back if you did your undergraduate degree in the US and you then wanted to convert. What I should say, there's too much information, I know that, but what I should say is that if you go then on to do postgraduate law degree in the United States, that does create issues in terms of your capacity to practice here, because whilst there may be some people who would demur to what I'm about to say, the laws are surprisingly different, and we do need to understand that. And so with a US law degree, you can do something called a QLTT once you've done it, the Qualified Lawyers Transfer Test, which effectively though would make you do another law degree. This is they call I think I used to call the priestly 11. You have to study 11 subjects and do a degree. So don't bother doing that. But if you want to stay in the United States, do an undergraduate degree and do a degree at a law degree at a good US university. Lawyers in America are extraordinarily well paid. I will say disgustingly well paid, offensively well paid. in my view. And Americans, perhaps unlike in this country, love to sue each other. They just love it. They can't get enough. Litigation in America is rampant. It's a behemoth. It's part of the culture, and so you couldn't necessarily go wrong. If you do well in the US, you want to be a lawyer in the US, you could certainly have a fantastic career, and there's nothing holding you back. You do your degree, then you do a bar exam in the state in which you want to be admitted, the traditional ones, California and New York, although there are others that are easier if you don't particularly want to be pushed, but you could do either of those and become an attorney in the United States and then have a fabulous career. But that's not as easily transportable back here. Coming back to the actual question, because I haven't addressed your question yet, unfortunately, is what are we looking for? Well, when we look at people, and I've had to hire lots of people over the years, I want someone who is very, very intelligent. I want someone who is very, very analytical. I want someone who is very, very logical. I want someone who is able to take a lot of information and put it in an order that's comprehensible very quickly. I want someone that is also to a degree personable. Lawyers, because so many people dislike us, we don't need to be that personable, but to a degree personable is important. But what we're really looking for is someone that has great resilience, because this is a job which is incredibly physically taxing, emotionally barren, and filled with all sorts of nastiness. So you need to be a pretty resilient person. You need to have a great capacity for hard work, and you need to be very, very bright. I would not do this job for money. Money is something that comes later. It is not a job. That's why there are so many people that fall out of law firms, certainly big law firms, after 2 or 3 years, very disillusioned. If you don't see this as a vocation, if you didn't want to do this since you were a little child, then it may not be the right thing for you. And that's one of the things that we look for in our interviewing process. If someone sort of says, well, I first decided I wanted to be a lawyer, or I wanted to be a barrister, or whatever it might be, when I was 8 years old, and my whole life is building to that. That's what I'm looking for. And it's that drive that gets you through. Very long answer, a lot of information, very sorry.
Thank you very much. Very interesting, and obviously a very different sort of career to most. Okay, the next question, and this is obviously very similar. I mean, literally, what would you like to see on a CV or a resume? If you picked one up, what sort of things, Renee, would stand out to you on a CV from a graduate?
That's another great question. Well, we definitely need to see that they've had some kind of work experience. Many of the new graduates come to us with a number of internships, which means they've had job experience throughout their college career. Some of it very focused on the career to which they're applying, and others maybe not. But it's something that I like to see, is that the person took some chances and really challenged themselves in the vacation periods away from school, and engaged in some different types of job activities, just giving them that sort of experience in an office environment, or in an environment where they want to start off their career. And yeah, definitely a lot of computer experience as well, like have been working with different types of softwares that we might be working with in our office environment. That's something else that we'd like to see. I also like to see, like, for international development work, someone with language capability in a language other than English. That's also something we like to look for. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And James, same question to you, but aside from the obvious propensity for working in law, is there anything on a CV that makes a potential candidate stand out?
Well, you've caveated the question, haven't you? So in terms of the beginning, I guess that if they when you're at school, you should be in debating club or the equivalent of that. You should love that. You should do very well. You should be competitive in that, ideally. Inter-school competitions and rising above, perhaps. There are a whole lot of other things. Whilst at university, there's the University World Debating Championships. I actually went to representing the country at Princeton in 1998 in the world final, and that is something we like to see. We like to see a whole lot of things like that. In terms of intelligence, a lot of lawyers say it's all very, very hard and you have to be so intelligent, but you don't want to be too intelligent. So there is actually economists would call this what would they call this? Law of diminishing returns. So you get to a particular, you're bright, you're very bright, but you're not a maths genius or something, because ultimately much of what we do is just boring. And you need to have a capacity to absorb that. And very, very, very bright people, and I've made the mistake of hiring people who are astonishing sort of astrophysicist sort of level brilliance. They don't stay in this job. So you want someone who's got very strong, very high grades, a little bit of a passion for it, the things that are helpful for it. Some competitive sports are also very nice. But I also like to see people who've worked through university in a part-time job, because unfortunately a lot of people don't have, and that feeds into a whole lot of things. One, how you understand the value of money, and that the money just doesn't come to you, you have to work for it. But also dealing with people of different types. You deal with people of different types all of the time. You need to make them do what you want them to do, whether that's a secretary, whether that's someone in the copy room or whatever. You need to be able to get on with people, and you need to be able to relate to them and behave in a way that's acceptable. And if you've worked through university in a part-time job, that teaches you the discipline, the value of understanding the value of money, and about getting on with people and how a work environment works. So those are the sorts of things we look for.
Lovely, very useful, thank you. When you've got some applicants and they get sent off to the HR department initially, Renee, how does that department assess those transferable skills that you were saying were so important?
Well, a lot of that comes through when you're going through an interview process. And again, there are clues that you can see, as James was mentioning, seeing someone who's had a part-time job, from that job or work experience that they've had during college, that they've learned time management, they've learned money management, they've been able to manage a lot of things at the same time, including going to school, which is also really important. I think it's especially with a new graduate, and you just have that sort of one-page CV or resume. It's a lot of reading between the lines, and then when you're actually talking to them, trying to pick up on those things from the questions that you ask and the answers that they give.
Great, thank you. And James, same question to you. When all these skills that you've talked about, how do you, when it comes to it, when they apply, what sort of processes you put in place, or what tests you put in place to try and assess whether or not the students or the applicants really have those skills?
Well, test is the word. So unfortunately, certainly we don't do it in the London, pardon me, in the London office here, but certainly when I was at Herbert Smith and Herbert Smith Freehills, then we did it, and all of the big English firms do it. It's a maze. So you begin by filling in a form that you're applying, and the form is not just a form. It requires you to write an essay about why you want to apply, what your history is, who you are, and what you believe that you can add to it. Then there is that and your academic transcript goes off to HR people who have some sort of equation, and gets rid of 70 or 80% of those people. They don't advance the next stage. Then at the next stage, there is effectively what is called an assessment day. The assessment day for all the top English firms, and indeed the top US firms in London, I know Whitecase do it here and Latham do it here, is a day where you're doing psychometric tests. You're going to do a first round interview. You're going to be asked to problem solve. You're going to be given problems. How do you approach a problem? Maybe not a legal problem, but and you need to write the answer for that. And then as a result of that, you'll cut another 15 to 20% of the people off. You're left then with, say, 10% of the applicants, which might mean you have 5 applicants for each position left. They'll be then invited back for a series of interviews. It's only at that point that those people meet any of the recruitment partners. Until that point, they've been going through a much more mechanical process. And then there'll be an interview with 2 or 3 people in the morning, and then perhaps another interview with 2 or 3 people in the afternoon, and then we make an assessment. Normally the process weeds out because there are practical things like they need to write an essay, they need to solve a problem, they need to do a whole lot of things. And we have people that will identify whether, and grade those things. And so when you get to the oral interview stage, we have a good idea as to the psychological makeup of this person, their academic background, their capacity to solve problems, their ability to express themselves, how they work in groups, how they relate to other people at the initial interview. And then the final two interviews really are about cultural issues. Is this person someone that we think is going to have a career with us? We don't really want to employ someone who's going to be with us for 2 years. We want to employ someone with us, of course, that we can drain the life out of completely. And so it's very, very important that we think the person fits into the ethos of the firm, understands someone that we'd like to work with. But really, that's what we all say. But the real truth is we're looking for people that will just do what needs to be done and not cause any difficulty. Ultimately, it boils down to this. If I meet someone, and I've been in that position where we've interviewed final trainees to make that selection, I'm looking for someone who I think is bright enough, who, if I give them a task and they don't know how to do that task, they will just sit in their chair and they'll ask me some questions, but they will then just sit in their chair and they won't go home until that's finished. They won't go home until that's done to the very, very best of their ability. And if that's all night, that's all night. And so they don't want to let you down. I think what we're shopping for is great psychological issues, really. Someone that is so obsessed that they don't want to let you down. And because that all lawyers have that, all successful lawyers have that. And so that's kind of what we're really looking for. We'll dress it up about culture and all sorts of things, but that's what it is. But you've got to have those tools, those basic foundations. They're already assessed so rigorously for you to get through the eye of the needle to the interview. You're 5% of the 800 or 900 people per position. And so you are an exceptional person just to be sitting there. And then it's really a question of, do we think you'll fit in? Do we think that you'll be you'll be easy to work with, but do we really think that you'll take ownership of the task that you're given, real ownership, and that you will, simply make it happen? And that is rare. There's a lot of people that have enormous amounts of self-confidence, but not a whole lot about substance. And that's the most dangerous combination I've ever come across. But that's what we look for.
Very, very interesting. Now, we've talked a lot about this already, and I think both of you have touched on this to some extent. I know, James, that you said that if you're going to go to law school, it's going to be the name of the law school that's going to matter a lot. And obviously there's it's so competitive, there's a shrinking number of places that you might be selecting from. But Renee, as someone who went to a liberal arts college, Renee, I thought maybe you could talk about this and talk about what whether Mott MacDonald pays that much attention to it, and in what cases they do.
That is also a great question, and certainly for Mott MacDonald, I don't think an undergraduate university, that one has a degree is really the entry point there. It doesn't matter too much, and as you kind of touched on earlier, American universities are very expensive. We do have a state school system here and a community college system here that tends to be a whole lot less expensive for students to go to. So we would never, think less of a candidate because they went through a university system that isn't maybe ranked as high. And those rankings are sometimes questionable anyway. But yeah, for me and for what I'm looking for in a hire, I don't really care about the university or necessarily what they majored in. Again, it's really more important to understand that, they've challenged themselves. They have that sort of grit or stamina to get things done, as James mentioned, and often people who go through a university system where they're working their own way through, to me, that demonstrates that they're really up for the kinds of challenges that may confront them in their workplace with us.
That's great. And just moving on, I suspect I know the answer to these questions, and I think, James, you touched on this already, but James, perhaps you want to say for you how much it would matter if someone was applying from the US, having studied undergraduate university in the US, how much that would matter to you?
If they did an undergraduate degree in the United States, I don't think it would particularly be a matter that would be, that wouldn't rule you out at all. In fact, it would make you probably quite curious and interesting. But you have to put it within the context of the people that, if you've got 5 candidates, Bristol, Durham, Oxford, Cambridge, it has to be within the prism of an equivalence. So and you say, well, okay, what's an equivalent, whether it's Harvard, whether it's Princeton, whether it's Yale, wherever it might be, UCLA, whether NYU. There are lots. There are so many universities in the United States. They're actually really outstanding, that it's not anywhere near as narrow as it is in this country, to be honest. There's just so many good ones. So no, I don't think it would necessarily do anything. What might help you, and you talk about liberal arts, I don't know the extent to which it applies, but if you did something that was quite interesting that could be applicable to a legal practice. So if you were someone that did biochemistry or something like that, that would actually be interesting, because you bring a skill. If you want to be a patent attorney, or you wanted to be someone that litigated intellectual property disputes, if you had some qualification in chemistry, or that could be hugely, or electrical engineering, that could be very helpful. Actually, and there's some very good people who've done that. But as a principle, no, it doesn't rule it out. But you apply the same rule as in this country. If you're applying to a top 10, top 5 a law firm, your chances of getting in, if you went to anything really outside the Russell Group, are slim. And if you did go outside the Russell Group, you have to win every medal in the world. You have to be university medalist and all that sort of stuff to have a shake. But in the US, there are plenty of universities which are actually equivalent to that small band here, and I wouldn't rule you out.
Great, and I'm glad you said that, James, because it allows me to point out again that if you're looking for equivalently ranked universities in America to the Russell Group, you're looking at a very large number of universities. So that's helpful. And Renee, what about you? I presume that being such an international company, you don't really mind where the degree comes from.
No, absolutely not. But it does indicate when you see someone's CV and they have studied abroad, it would certainly make it very interesting to us, especially in my group, where we're looking for people who have language skills. Many of the people who do apply may have gone to US universities, but has studied in Europe and Asia and other places. So, it's certainly something that we would talk about as being an asset in the application process, for sure.
I've run out of questions from me, but I'm just going to ask people who are listening if you've got any particular questions for our speakers before we finish up. If not, I can always think of questions to put them on the spot with. So if anyone does have any questions, feel free to pop them in the Q&A box, and then otherwise we'll get finished up. But I suppose in the meantime, I do have a question, and Renee, I'm going to pose this to you again. I had meant to put a Malcolm Gladwell quote in this presentation, but didn't quite have time to put it in. But Malcolm Gladwell talks about how, on average, it's better to do well at a university that isn't as well known than to do badly at a really famous university. And I wondered for you, if you saw a CV from someone who had been to a very famous university and had got, let's say, the equivalent of a kind of third-class degree, versus someone who'd been to, I'm going to pick University of Maryland because I know that Malcolm Gladwell mentions that, but had done extremely well. How would you view those two people, everything else being equal?
Right. Well, it's not very common on applications here when you get applicants to disclose their GPA or the grades that they achieved when they were at university, or their test scores or anything like that. They'll just say, I have a degree. a Bachelor of Arts, a Bachelor of Science, whatever it might be, from this university. But, if I were to know, again, I would say, Malcolm Gladwell comes to this from a certain viewpoint because he went to a very large public university in Canada. I believe he went to the University of Toronto, it happens to be a very, very brilliant writer and speaker and thinker. But yeah, I think, in terms of if I knew that a person had gone to a really great university and had not done that well, I don't think I would hold that against them. I live in Cambridge, Massachusetts, so I live in the place with one of those big, very famous, very high-ranked universities, and I know a lot of people who went there, including my husband. So I do know that it is quite rigorous, and at the same time, it's very, very demanding curriculum with very rigorous study, with very, very high expectations of students. So I believe at Harvard, they call it gentlemen's C's, or they used to call it gentlemen's C's. Now it's co-ed, meaning that, earning an average grade at Harvard is not a bad thing. Also, I studied architecture as an undergrad, and I had to take my actual studio courses at MIT, which is another big famous university here in my hometown. It was very, very, very competitive. And yeah, getting a C or an even lower grade at MIT, they sort of thought it would help you to be more resilient, to work harder, to encourage you to do better. Whereas at some universities, their grading policies might be quite different. So, I guess all of this babbling on to say, I guess it doesn't matter that much unless you really know the context.
Okay, thank you. And conveniently to finish up here, we do have a question for you, James. It's a slightly technical question about law conversions, but if an applicant had studied in the US for undergraduate degree and then did a law conversion in the UK, would they be as competitive as an applicant who had just studied law in the UK? But if you'd studied law at undergraduate level in the UK, would you have to do a conversion anyway, or?
The short answer is that your most recent question, the last question, is you don't have to do the GDL, the graduate degree law. If you have if you do a law degree at Oxford, you do a law degree at Durham, you do at Bristol, or actually there's some very good. Sheffield actually has a decent law faculty. You do a law degree, you still have to do what's called the LPC, which is the legal practice course, which is a 1-year course. Everyone has to do it, but you don't need to do the GDL, because the difference is, of course, a law degree, depending upon where you go, is 2 to 3 years, whereas the GDL is 1 year. And so I actually prefer, most people that work for me have law degrees, because it's just being a disputes lawyer, I do need someone to really understand equity, but properly. It's not like a 4-week thing. I need them to have done it for a year, so they really do know the case law. But it's not a big deal, and many people are very successfully transition. So the question that was posed, I think, is if you did an undergraduate degree in the United States, would it? Oh, sorry, that's a different question. I haven't answered that. Yes, if an applicant has done a law conversion after do a degree in the US, would they be as competitive as an applicant who studied law in the UK? Yes. But again, Renee's answer is the best one to adopt. It completely depends. If you went to a good university in the United States and did extremely well, then you might be even more competitive than someone that went to Oxford and did not so well in an LLB. Now, remember also in this country, you can do a whole range of different law degrees, and it's a bit stupid. There's LLB, which is Bachelor of Laws. There's also BCL, Bachelor of Civil Law, which is actually a more competitive degree. Either way, it doesn't really matter, but it depends on what degree you did in the US, how you did it, and how you performed. You would be as competitive if you did well. If you didn't do so well, or you didn't go to a great university, university, probably it would hamper you in the same way it would as if you'd studied in this country.
Great, thanks very much. There is one more question here, but I'm going to ask that person to email me directly, because I think it's a rather technical question about time allowed in American universities and probably not as related to today's conversation. So what I'm just going to do is finish up by just reminding everyone of all the things that we do. Obviously, our whole organization is about helping people get into American and other universities. We help with the SAT and ACT that you may or may not have to do. You may be interested to hear that MIT announced yesterday they will be requiring the SAT and ACT again. So do think carefully before deciding to go test optional. We also have a counselling service that guides you all the way through it from as many as 4 or 5 years before you apply. I know that sounds terrifying, but we're here to make your life less stressful, not more stressful. And if you do want to book a call with us, you can just go to our website, useducation.com/free-call, or book in a call with us. So all that remains for me to say for now is to say thank you very much to the speakers. Renee Chandenet, thank you very much for representing Mott MacDonald, and James, thank you very much for representing Quinn Emanuel. I'm really pleased to hear that a lot of the things that I assumed were correct were indeed correct, but I've also been terrified to hear what it takes to become a lawyer. I'm very glad that I'm not one, but I'm sure many people will want to be one. So thank you very much. This has been recorded. You'll be able to find it on our YouTube channel later on. But if you do have other questions, you've got our email address. Looking forward to hearing from you. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.